Welcome to the possibilities. To be honest, I almost said Sean's thoughts, and then I remembered, oh, wait a minute. This is a possibility. And this is actually the more interesting, I'd say, of, or not more interesting, I per se, because, interesting depends upon the receiver's perception. But for me, spending time in these amazing thoughts of possibilities is somewhere that I truly do imagine that should we or could we or would we spend a lot more of our attention, meaning share our attention with the possibilities and wonders of this world, that we perhaps would essentially catapult ourselves into a new reality. So, thank you for joining with me today in the Possibilities Podcast. You're here with me in the middle of this other fern forest. There's actually someone up on a trail in behind there with a dog. But nonetheless, I'm here with you and you're here with me, and we're here together in this moment of time. And so I'd like to step into frame. And as I do, thank you for sharing your attention with me, as I feel it's of the utmost importance, as I said, that we do share these moments in wonderment, in pondering what could be. And you see, I had done a video about this. In today's video, we're going to talk about a world with the potential of open borders. See, because for so long we have lived in a world where we have been separated through as many delineated devices that they could essentially, surround and cover us and wrap us around in. And one of those greatest potential powers was putting us on either side of a border. So, what I want for us to do, and perhaps me to imagine today, is living in a world where there are no borders. Like, what would a world look like if we didn't have labels, calling us one version of humanity and calling that group over there another label of humanity? What would it be like if we were to live in a world where the world was our oyster, meaning that we could roam freely around the world, in respect and alignment with our beautiful planet, respecting that each step that we take forward is a step that we would essentially be able to tell the world about, that would be authentic and truthful. And so, if you look at many different parts of the world, you can see that some areas of the world, for example, in the Middle East and over in Europe, their borders are considerably smaller, as if people were taking original standing areas and just dividing them up into two and calling them, Eastern Germany and Western Germany, or South Korea and North Korea, like taking these smaller areas and then dividing them up into two different areas, when in all actuality, the people themselves, all people throughout the world, we are all the same, regardless of just, the pigmentation of our skin and perhaps the bone structures that, our ancestors had within us. That we are all of one, and that we are essentially have a lot of the same desires and, dreams. We all want to be in abundance. And, honestly, that word of abundance is somewhat different for each person who examines it, because we all have different experiences. So if you've lived in a world with lack, your idea of abundance might simply mean having a cold meal and, a roof over your head every day for the rest of your life, versus other people who have had a lot and grown up in materialism. They might look at, having a yacht and taking a yacht with everything they need on it and going off into the seven seas. There's definitely a difference in what people think abundance is. But yet, if we were to imagine just the abundance of our planet, if we didn't have trees on one side of a line and, water on the other side of the line, and we were living in the ability to share and, well, to share in the bounty of this beautiful planet, you know, I don't know, I think that when I had originally done my first video to do with the possibilities of living in a world of open borders, it was a really windy day, yet I felt that the actual audio itself, it was, for what I was thinking about anyways, phenomenally done. So I highly recommend. I'm gonna leave that up. I'm making this part 2 essentially. I recognize that that day was windy and the microphone did have some issues. Today is a little less windy, although there is a little bit of a wind here. I'm sure it's not influencing. There's this beautiful, yeah, there's that, if you can keep hearing it, there's a beautiful bird that's chirping over my head. Isn't that lovely? So, as I mentioned before, on my previous video, I had the opportunity to walk across borders, and I've walked across 3 borders in my lifetime thus far. I would love to walk across no more, meaning that I would love for, what we consider a border now with armed guards and big buildings and visa stamps and passport regulations and car searches and all of that stuff. I would imagine that we could potentially live in a world without that. As we grow more sovereign, as we, pick our own power back up and reclaim it, and at the same time, we reclaim our respect for our brothers and sisters all over this planet, I do foresee the potential of living in a world with no borders. And that's why I think that this particular talk is of the utmost importance because, you know, I often talk about there being an amazing potential for the world, so many different possibilities. And to explore them allows us to open up for the potential of them. And therefore, when we open up for the potential of something like no borders, or at least, you know, the dissolving of the borders eventually, we open up for the possibility of this new and beautiful world that, as I've mentioned before, is already there. To give you a great example is you don't see like the American eagle worrying about, if there's a border between Canada and America. It just flies. It flies free. You don't worry. I mean, there are animals who are worrying about being on one side of a border versus the other, unless there is a giant mammoth-sized fence that's put up and supported by, propaganda claiming that all these terrible things are happening, and so therefore you need to put up a giant fence. Giant fences have been all over the world from, as I mentioned, in Germany and, recently in Mexico and America, and then across northern China area and a lot of other places. Fence have been used to essentially delineate the ownership of one area versus another area. But yet, the true owner of our planet, I truly do believe, is God. God being of all things. And more importantly, and more specifically, the earth is sovereign. The earth is its own being. It houses so many of us here, so many beings for us to experience this beautiful 3D dimensional reality that's turning into 4D and then 5D for many. And, I don't necessarily think that one piece of the land needs to be called another piece of the land, but then that does go into the whole concept of ownership, of who owns the land that we live on. And quite frankly, I believe, as I've just mentioned, that the ownership is the land itself, that no human being, regardless if they claim to be Aboriginal people of that area or, they're just recent colonists who've come over to this country supposedly through the narratives, the stories that we learn about in the last 150, 100 years. The ownership of the land still truly does belong to the land itself, and that everything that lives there, when in harmony, allows for that abundance to essentially flourish. For all that are organic and required to live off the land, that they have everything that they need at the moment they need it, no sooner, no later, perhaps. But nonetheless, do we really need borders? If we were to move into a world where respect is the first and most important aspect of relationships, and of course, when we live and we're connected with love, Do borders necessarily really matter in the sense that do we need to check ID? Do we need to make sure we know who everyone is? Especially when you look at, these areas that are separated, these smaller areas where you can walk from one side of the country to the other within that same day. I've heard of places like this. I've never actually traveled to them myself, but nonetheless, what would a world look like if we were to do away with borders? Now, first and foremost, when someone's listening to this, they might think of all the reasons they have been sold the requirements of borders, that we need to protect our borders, that we need to keep other people out. And, recently, actually, I've heard countries talk about how they need to keep people in their borders and they have different financial penalties if you were to leave their borders, for example. But if we were to consider and to move away from those fear-driven narratives and recognize that a border is an arbitrary line that's drawn on a map, and I say arbitrary, I mean, as often it's in an unimportant with the exception of the person who did write on the border. And even with all these worldwide land claims claiming that one group owns this part of land and that person over there or that group over there owns that land, you know, really, do we truly need any of that? Are we living in a fearful state and do essentially borders promote fear? For when we live in a world where we can walk from one side of the country to the other, or from one side of the continent to another, does that not allow for us to truly be sovereign, to make those decisions and, ride those kilometers, whether it's on a bike or a hopefully a new pair of shoes? Actually, I've had the fortune, I'll say, to witness several different people who were riding on their bikes, who were hiking, people on a motorbike, but actually a lot of people on their bicycles riding across the country. There was one man who had ridden his bike out from Eastern Canada, and now he's back on to going Western Canada, and he's just riding a bicycle. But there's also other people that are hiking along the Trans-Canada Trail, and, there's a lot of different people that are venturing across Canada. Now, Canada, it's a very unique place because the borders that we have, which would, if we were on the other side of the planet, they would be, country borders because the provinces in Canada, if you're unaware of this, and actually some of the states in America, they are larger than most countries. Actually, the province that I live in, British Columbia, it's larger, as I understand it, than the country of France. That we have provinces in our country that we are, of course, permitted to drive across these borders in our country because they're all just provinces, but they are larger than most European countries. We can fit some of a group of countries into just one of our provinces, and we are free to move about. So I can imagine it being challenging for people who are living in some of these European countries or even Western European countries where the borders are so close together and the movement of populations is restricted, leading me to believe that perhaps the true reason for borders is just to restrict population migration. Perhaps there's a reason why they want certain numbers of people in certain areas, and therefore you have to apply for a visa to even leave your own country. And then you have to wait for that to happen, and more importantly, you have to pay large amount of fees to even be allowed to leave your country. And that's truly what the passport and even visas are, is that we are paying for fees. We are being told that, this is what the cost of a passport costs. And yet I know from my own experience of being over in China, to print little books like a little passport book probably cost a few cents, maybe a dollar at the most. And yet to charge the hundreds of dollars depending on how fast you want it expedited seems that it's more of a money grab than, an actual process that needs to be done. Yes, there's fancy paper on it, but there's also fancy paper on Pokemon cards. That's actually probably a lot more fancier in some cases, with the exception of maybe that one page that I've seen it in movies where the counterfeit person slides in another photograph and it's pretty easy breezy, showing us that perhaps is not as challenging and maybe there is a profit to be made by selling visas and passports, leading me to return to the idea that I had promoted before is what if we don't require that stuff? And even if we were to keep borders, as lines on a map to delineate, north and south, do we really need all of that red tape and restrictions when it comes to walking across or even driving a vehicle across? Yes, it's probably very important, at least for the time being, to, you know, be able to identify oneself. There's probably a lot of good reasons for security, especially in the times we find ourselves in now, but yet to restrict and to put things behind a paywall. And that's what it is. Kind of like, on the internet, people always get frustrated because, a website will give you a little bit of news, but then they'll put the rest behind a paywall, or they'll put other information behind a paywall. And in a sense, issuing passports and visas by charging an arm and a leg for them is putting the rest of traveling behind a paywall, requiring that you have a large amount of money. In Canada, you know, after all is said and done, a passport's gonna cost 150 approximately, and then that's without even it being shipped to you if you want that, and then you wanna go to certain countries, and then there's another fee, and then there's even airport improvement fees for when you land in the airport, and there's so many different fees that essentially are restricting our ability to move free within our own planet. So what would a world look like without a border? Without having regulations, rules, and restrictions telling us where we can and cannot go based on our, financial status. I think it would be amazing. I think the amount of people and ideas and concepts and, just overall the potential of the intermixing and intermingling of people from all over the world having languages and being able to share that more so with each other rather than being restricted. There are some countries in the world where, you're not even able to leave your own country. And I find that challenging. And perhaps many of you are unaware of that, that there are countries that, people aren't allowed to leave their own country, that they're restricted from going anywhere. And so, even in Canada, we have a large amount of people who migrated to Canada or immigrated to Canada, and for many different reasons. Most importantly, because they wanted to come to a world or a land where there was more opportunity than that which they were in their own countries. And so sometimes it's the restrictions aren't even just about, having to apply, it's not being able to even leave. So if we had a world with open borders, perhaps there would be more nomadic people that were moving around. And for me, the idea of moving around our planet without concern that we were, going across someone's border and we weren't apt to be there, I think is phenomenal for us. Perhaps our nature as Homo sapiens is maybe to be nomadic, to live from the land and essentially go where our hearts were guided, feeling that, the place that we were venturing to and from were both safe. And so a world without borders could possibly be a much more loving and allowing place that I feel that maybe that's the growth that we have all been looking for. To be free, truly free, not restricted or separated by I'm British Columbian and he's Albertan, or I'm Canadian and he's American, to release ourselves from these labels, perhaps even to recognize that we are all earthlings, if we want to use that word. Like we are all, beings of this beautiful planet. As I mentioned in my podcast previously, we are all of the planet, means that the materials that make up our corporeal being, our human body, are all elements that came from the earth. And one day, perhaps they will return to that earth, to that, steady stream of materials and molecules and photons and Ethereum perhaps, and Ethereum as well. But nonetheless, yeah, just imagine if you're in a country right now and, you look across the field that's in front of you and there's another country there and you know that you're not allowed to go there. Imagine one day that you are. Where would you go? If you could walk anywhere in this planet, where would you walk to? I really would like to know. And, if you're on the other side of Mexico, maybe you wanna walk to America, but if you're in America, maybe you wanna walk to Mexico and then keep walking until you get down to Argentina, or maybe walk all the way down to Argentina and then get on a boat and go to Antarctica and see what's there. I think that there's a lot more adventure forthcoming for all of us, and for those ones who are truly wishing to grab a hold of life, that there is a lot of opportunity that's coming in the near future, and perhaps you could honestly say it's already here. The limitations perhaps are what maybe is evaporating right now. And what we're seeing is chaos in our world. Perhaps that is the beginning of the end for something that we once called borders. And so, as I said, to spend more time in possibility, in the mind frame of possibility, help us shift our consciousness. Now, I know there perhaps I'm projecting, but there may be people who are finding all the reasons why I'm saying what I'm saying couldn't happen. And yes, there are possibly, steps that we need to get through to get to where that possibility does truly exist. But when we spend more time considering what could be with positive attributes and with a strong sense of intention and love and respect, then we can allow for more to potentially be. And that's where the true silver lining or the nuggets of gold are. It's in what could be with respect to our sovereignty and our freedom and potential love and relationships rather than what we are used to. And what we are used to is being on a map delineated into over 220 different countries, being told that we can only go where we're allowed to go when we're allowed to go, and if we have the money, and then even when we get there, we're still required to pay more money. But yet, when all of those limitations no longer are, then where does that leave us? It leaves us to journey to our heart's content and to trust that source is there guiding us, loving us, and helping us experience so that perhaps source can experience through us as well. This is completely obviously different from my original podcast, so I'm definitely going to put that one up at the end. This isn't necessarily a remake. I thought that that's what I would be doing. This is more of a deep dive I'm seeing, and it's a deep dive in a very beautiful moss and fern forest, which is quite far from my previous moss and fern forest and tree trunk, decaying tree trunk offering life to so many other things. I really trust that YouTube is going to assist me in promoting my channel, my podcasts more heavily and sharing them with the people that truly are present and ready to perhaps hear what I have to say. And when I mean ready, that's from an egotistical point of view. It means, the information which we are so called ready to receive is the information where we hold alignment to be able to receive it. Means there's a lot of things that I could sit here and tell to whoever it is that's listening that even if you can or are listening to this particular audio, there's a high probability that, your alignment may not allow you to receive other audios. And therefore, I have come to understand that not every audio that I create is for everyone. But if you're imagining a world of great possibility and you would like to, explore and expand your own horizons, then I highly recommend you check out my possibilities playlist or podcast, I mean. I link it at the end of this video tomorrow after it finishes publishing. It usually takes about 24 hours for it to go up. If you want to look over there now, you can go into my podcasts on my YouTube channel and you'll find the Possibilities podcast playlist. And there's a lot of remastered material in there, and it's a lot shorter than this talk today. I'm well, there's 2 versions of it, but nonetheless, there's an unscripted and a scripted version, more of a remastered version, I'd say. But there's a lot of different ideas in there that perhaps, just perhaps it sparks some idea within you. And then some possibility will suddenly be a potential for you, and your life could suddenly, just like that old dial on the old style TVs, where suddenly something that didn't make sense before of how it could be suddenly makes sense because a possibility has been brought into your field. So, welcome to this amazing podcast, the one that, I'll say that God and my guides really tried to get me to do like 3 years ago, and yet I put so many different podcasts in the between there and then, but I recognize that everything happens for a reason. And I'm so proud of my other 9 series that I currently have on YouTube and across my several platforms that I'm available to. So I highly recommend, I encourage you, I ask you, come over, subscribe, review, like, definitely comment, and share what you experience, because sharing is caring, and it's caring about more than just oneself. Yes, we are on our own separate journeys, but we are doing it together. And so when you share your thoughts, your insights, your frustrations, your even your anger, then that allows someone else to connect. And it may not always be the picture perfect meringue pie that you turn those lemons into, but nonetheless, if you shoot for the moon and you get a little less, you probably hit a few stars, and that's a lot different than just trying to get across the river, as I mentioned before. So thank you so much for sharing your time and attention with me. I trust that, everyone will receive when it's their time. As for me, it's my time. And I intend to utilize every moment of it. This is day number 18, I think, of living within this planet I call home. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.